Hello students and welcome to Identifying Different Cells and Their Parts by Mrs. Krupp. We will be looking at the various parts in a cell and using our knowledge about those parts to identify what kind of cell we are looking at. So as we begin, when we look at these cells, we can see a couple of things. First of all, this cell right here, oops, get my pen here. This cell right here does not have a nucleus, so it has no nucleus. So it is a prokaryote, some type of bacteria. And we can see the flagellum here. And then we can also see the genetic material. And one of these right here, and I think it's this blue one here, is the cell membrane. Now we know, and this is very important for you to remember, that every single cell has a cell membrane, regardless of whether or not it's a prokaryote or eukaryote, bacteria, plant, animal cell, any of those things, they all have a cell membrane. Just like this one right here, it's this little dark orange line here, that's the cell membrane. And on this one, what we see here, and let me change my pen here, set it a little bit thicker, and we'll do red here. Okay, so what we are looking at is right here we see the mitochondria, and I'm just going to put mito, and we see another one here, but here we see a nucleus. Now there may or may not be a vacuole in this particular cell. I am assuming that these little blue dots are ribosomes, but we have not studied those in depth, so we're not going to address that. So because we don't see a vacuole and we see a nucleus, we can assume that this is actually an animal cell. So remember, the first thing we're looking for is the large vacuole, and then we will move on and look for the cell wall and any other parts that we can use to identify it. So the next one we're going to look at, I'm not sure what it is, but we will see. Okay, so this one, I'm looking for a vacuole, and I don't see it. I do not see a large vacuole, but I do see this, and this is what I think is the vacuole. The only thing is, it's not larger than the nucleus. It's not as big or bigger than the nucleus. So because of that, I know then I'm not really looking at a plant cell, but I do see mitochondria. And of course, this clear stuff is cytoplasm. And here is the nucleus, so we know we're looking at either a plant or an animal cell. Here's the little nucleolus right in here. And so at this point, that's really all I can see. I do see this right here is what we might call the cell membrane, or it is the cell membrane. And we talked about this earlier, but because there's no large vacuole, there is no cell wall, and so we can just call that the cell membrane. So because we have no large vacuole and there's no cell wall, we are looking at an animal cell. And so the structures that actually identify this would be the nucleus, the mitochondria, cell membrane, and the vacuole. Those are the four structures that identify this as an animal cell. In this cell, we see here this purple line is a cell membrane. And when I go in and look, and the first thing I'm looking for is the large vacuole, I only see this structure here. That's the largest structure in the cell. And so this is definitely the nucleus. And here we see mitochondria. But there is no large vacuole, but these little blue things here are what we can call the vacuoles. So once again, we don't see a large vacuole. There is no cell wall, and nothing in here appears to be chloroplast, so we are actually looking at an animal cell. Now, as we look at this one, the first thing we notice is that we are looking for, the first thing we're looking for is number one, large vacuole. And so as we look, we see it right here. This is a large vacuole. Okay, so we know that we got the large vacuole. So the next thing we're looking for is the cell wall. And as we look right here, it's very hard to tell, but you see a green line and then you see this blue line. So this little gap right in here is the cell wall. And so the next thing we're looking for then are chloroplasts. Right here are chloroplasts. Here are the mitochondria. So we see chloroplast. And then this is the mitochondria. Okay. And here is the nucleus. So because we have a large vacuole, we have a cell wall, and then we have chloroplasts, we are looking at a plant cell. Okay, so as we look at this one is kind of challenging because the coloring is off and the shapes are not, they're not like what we've been looking at. But here we have the nucleus, and here we have this structure which is bigger or as big as the nucleus. So we know we are looking at a large vacuole. And here's our nucleus. And so based on that, and then here we have our mitochondria, and there's a slight zigzag pattern there, so we know that's what that is. It's a mitochondria, so I'm going to put that there. But actually, we know our rules are that we look for the large vacuoles, that's number one. And the second thing we're looking for is this right here, and that is the cell wall. So number two that we look for is the cell wall. And then we look for chloroplasts, which we see right here, these green patchy things. So, and that's number three. So we know then that we are looking at a plant cell, even though it's really kind of odd, not the typical shape we look at. This is a really good example because we see this right here as a cell wall. But before we identify the cell wall, we have to first identify the large vacuole. And this we know is the nucleus, so we see this other structure that is as big or bigger than the nucleus, so we know that is the large vacuole. So the second thing we look for is the cell wall, which we see here. We saw that immediately. But we always have to check. We've got to check for that large vacuole first before we jump to the conclusion that we are looking at a plant cell. So here's our cell wall right here. And then the last thing we want to look for, double check, is our chloroplast, which we see right here. And we do see mitochondria here. Here's a zigzag, and here's a zigzag. So we do have chloroplast. Here's another chloroplast back here. So we are, in fact, looking at a plant cell. Okay, so we know that this is a plant. So we're going to try another one. Okay, now this one is not colored like we're used to, but the first one we're going to look for are two large structures, one of them being the large vacuole. So I'm just going to put large, or L, vac. So that's what we know we're talking about. And so I see here's the nucleus right here. And then here's another structure that is as large or larger than the nucleus, so we know that's the large vacuole. Then we're looking for the cell wall. Forgive my handwriting, it's really bad. And so here is the cell wall, kind of this rigid structure, so that's pretty obvious. And then we're looking for the chloroplast, and I'm going to assume right here, even though it's covered up with the pen, there's chloroplast, and there's chloroplast right there. So it makes sense to me that that would be chloroplast, and it's green as well. So we are looking at a plant cell. Okay, so this one is a little bit tricky in the sense that things are kind of layered on top of each other. But as we look for the large vacuole, First we identify the nucleus here, we see that here. So then we look for that large vacuole, and here it is right here, because we see this huge structure that is bigger than the nucleus. So that's the large vacuole. And now we're going to look for the cell wall. And here it is right here. We can see it, it's very obvious. So then we look for the chloroplast. And so here are all of these chloroplasts. See those there? And then we see our zigzag mitochondria. So we know that because we have a large vacuole, cell wall, and a chloroplast, that we are looking at a plant cell. Okay, so just to review, let's review our steps. And try this. Okay, so step number 1 is, in order to identify a plant cell, we first look for the large vacuole. And we know that the large vacuole is going to be as big or bigger than the nucleus. Okay, so when we find this, once we find this, then we can go on to step 2. And step 2 says that we look for the cell wall. And typically, we are going to see a gap. So when we see that gap, we're pretty sure, once we have the large vacuole and we see this gap in the outline of the cell, that we have a plant cell. But to double check ourselves, because we are going to have to identify the structure as well, we need to look for the chloroplasts. So look for chloroplasts. And the best way to do this is to differentiate between what could be chloroplasts and what could be mitochondria. So when we look for the chloroplasts, we think we've got them. We double check. We check ourselves with the mitochondria, which actually looks like a bean with a zigzag in it. And remember, we said that the easiest way to remember that would be, think about Mighty Mouse, and Mighty Mouse eats zigzag beans. So that's the easiest way for me to remember it. So I'm just going to put here zigzag beans, and then we'll definitely remember that so that we can check ourselves, and then we'll know whether we have a plant or an animal cell. So I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you next time.